Cool. Okay. Welcome. Thank you all for coming. I'm super excited about this. And I know many of you are as well. This is my first working group at GitLab. And it just so happens it's also my first time facilitating a working group at GitLab. So bear with me, but my role here is just to help us stay organized, stay on track, follow up on issues and keep stakeholders up to date as to our progress and what's going on. So I put a couple things in the agenda, but the first thing I just wanted to say thank you all for your time. I know this is extra in addition to many of our daily responsibilities, but we all feel passionate about this problem, this challenge, and working closely together to find a solution. And I'm excited to do it across stages, across functions, and really work closely together. So I thought maybe we can start. I'm somewhat new to GitLab, and I know half of you on this call, but I thought maybe we could do a quick round of introductions. So just name your role and what stage you're from, I think is probably good enough, and we can just rattle it off quickly. So I'll start. Justin, I'm the group manager for, group product manager for the plan stage. So we're closely with the plan team. Yeah, PM. I don't know who wants to go next. I see a Noop next in my squares.
Hi, I'm on day 36. I'm the VP of Product Management for Features and Functions at GitLab, and this is my first working group as well. And I'm the sponsor for this group, so I thought it'll be great to come here and actually learn as well while I'm sponsoring.
Great, thanks for being here. Natalia, I think you're next, at least in my view.
Hi everyone, I'm staff front-end engineer and I work on Create Stage Knowledge Group.
Great. Donald?
Hi all, Donald Cook, front-end engineering manager on the plan stage.
Awesome. Marcus?
Hello, I'm Marcus. I'm a backend engineer in the Create Knowledge Group.
Great. And then our UX functional leader, Mike?
Hi. I'm Mike Long. I'm a product design manager supporting Dev Manage and Dev Plan.
Awesome. Kristen?
Hey, I'm Kristen, and I'm a senior PM on the Create Knowledge Group.
Great. And then Liam?
Hi everyone, I'm Liam. I'm a backend engineer and manager for Manage Access and Manage Import.
There's only one left.
Gabe, senior product manager for the project management group in the plan stage.
Great. Cool. Thank you all for that. And good to meet those of you who I haven't met yet. So second one I thought, and there's some discussion that was left unresolved in the original MR to open the working group, but I wanted to just circle back on it and make sure the 9 of us are aligned and feel good about the exit criteria. So I'll just leave it there, but I click that link. You've probably read it. Do we feel comfortable with that exit criteria? Is there anything we'd like to change? Any questions?
I think my only one is, I don't know if we want to add this. I think we have to make sure that we mitigate risks with this and the 4 that are outlined, because this does impact a lot of areas of the product. And yeah, but I also think that given that, like we maybe can't take implement the thing all the way through, but we should, I feel like, have clear DRIs and timelines for executing on whatever it is that we figure out we need to do. Because I think it's one thing to validate it, but it's another thing to make it happen. And I don't want to like sputter out at that stage necessarily. So
yeah.
I was thinking that too, just looking at it, like I like that we're defining the solution versus the implementation, but the implementation part is still pretty blurry to me and scary in a way, because it does touch everything.
So can I make this proposal? Maybe on the implement solution that has a big TBD on it right now, we say the X criteria of the working group is to deliver a well-scoped MVC that's appropriately broken down into, different pieces of work across different groups, with a clear way to sort of follow up and take action on delivering that MVC. Does that sound okay?
I think that's getting more specific, and maybe after a week or two, we could even choose the object that we want to implement at group level as the first one, maybe, and make that the exit criteria. For example, designs at group level. But I don't know if that would be the one, but something like that, that we could take as a first stab and then have the rest of the plan. Or are we saying to be done, we would have to basically move everything to group level, all flip the switch on everything?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's not what I was suggesting necessarily.
Okay.
How do other people feel about that? About what Kristen suggested?
I think the kind of spirit and point of this is to make it so that you don't have to implement things at the group level, if that makes sense. So like we have a group and we have a project. The project can do X, Y, and Z, and a group can do X and A, right? So like it's really about, can we merge something together and have a thing that is the same? So that way we don't have to go one by one with each feature and duplicate it at the group level, which is super inefficient. I don't know what the solution is, but I have a hypothesis that if we can figure out what that combined thing looks like and make it usable and like understandable by our users, they'll much prefer that over the complicated group project structure that is limiting and frustrating.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. 7:30 a.m. So we're trying to bring the projects and the group objects merged, right? So we don't have to necessarily roll them all up, but we do have to bring the feature sets together on the major object, so they're the same between projects and groups. So they have the same.
Working hypothesis that could be disproven during the first phase, which would be the risk mitigation and solution validation.
Okay. So I guess MVC asterisks in terms of determining what that really means, but I guess from a working group context, like we're not going to say this working group must deliver on this whatever solution we validate and ship it, and it's live in production, our customers are using it. It's more that we've validated the solution, maybe that's the exit criteria, and have appropriate DRIs and work assigned, or at least put in the right places to go execute on. Is that good?
Yeah, I think that's a good starting point. And it's also at a certain point, as we get closer to the deadline that we set for ourselves, we can revisit and decide together as a group if we want to extend the exit criteria. Like we just did that for the real-time working group, just because we got to the point where we realized we needed to make sure we mitigated some risk with our reference architecture. So we added that as an additional exit criteria. And it's okay. I think it's okay to do that if we agree as a group to do that.
Yep.
With the blessing of Anoop, of course.
Sure. Yeah, Anoop, any concerns with any of that?
No, it makes sense to me.
Great. Yeah, my hope too on this is that I want to make this working group as efficient as possible so that we're not meeting together for months on end. Like I'd love for us to get to that end. And if we have to extend, that's great, but get to that point in a, 6-8 weeks time. So I think that works really well from my perspective. Okay. I will open an MR to update that. I'll tag all of you. And if you have feedback, jump in there. So where do we go from here? I can let you all take over. I was just spending the morning reading through some of the details in the thread that Alex had started around the namespace class. So I don't know if that's a good place to start discussing potential solutions, but I can hand it over to you guys.
Sorry, I missed the first.
Maybe one of the things that we could do is like if we look at our first set of exit criteria. Sorry, I'm going to copy this over into the agenda just so we can take notes real quick. I'm going to put this in. I'm going to put this up top, so we can iterate on that. Like if we look right now, do we want to just like better outline some of the risks, I guess, that we need to mitigate as we go through this? Because there's like the business viability piece, right? So we have a lot of invested in groups already from a documentation standpoint, existing customer knowledge of the product, how maybe some features in flight are going. We need to make sure that like whatever we come up with, we can talk high level about the solution, but then I think by in this meeting, it would be great to have, I don't know if we can do that in the next 16 minutes or 15 minutes, but like what we're going to do for each of these next steps and who's going to maybe work on that. Or if we all want to swarm on just doing one of them at a time, that would be fine too.
Oh, that sounds good to me.
I'm wondering if it's worth, especially on the first call, to start with just talking more about what the problem is that we're trying to solve. And the reason I say that is because I think there's lots of issues throughout the issue tracker. So I know, Gabe, I believe you've created one in reference to containers. I believe there's been several others related to that. There's been a whole bunch of stuff on the access side around organizations, around permissions, around like inheritance, a hierarchy and things like that. And my understanding is that there's probably, I was going to say conflicting, but probably more likely complementing priorities on the different stages of what we want to achieve out of this and kind of what the problem is that's preventing us from moving forwards. So I don't know if I could like volunteer you, Gabe, in terms of the person I think who's probably like written the most about this from a product standpoint and the creator of the container issue. If you could just like maybe verbalize for everyone on the call what you see the problem is as of today.
Sure. I think I went through, would it be helpful for me to review the opportunity canvas that I did that kind of outlines some of the problems?
Yeah, I think that sounds great.
Cool. Good. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I'll do that real quick. Can you see my screen? Yes. Cool. Let me move you guys out of the way. Or y'all, excuse me. So one of the things that I keep coming across is this, like, especially within project management, we have like this group, subgroups, and projects. But the feedback that I've gotten consistently from our customers is that it's super confusing. Like how? And then it's usually like once we get these like structures set up, they aren't optimal for how the teams are organized. And so like there's a lot of moving of projects and groups, which breaks namespaces of things that are configured in CI. And it seems like feedback is, every 6 to 9 months, they have to completely reorganize their groups and project structure to better fit to make things flow up and down the hierarchy the way they need to. And that's one problem. I think there's also the problem of you have some things at the group level that don't exist at the project level, and that's a super confusing experience. Like a common thing that I see, and I can just kind of show this right quick. If I go to my group right here and I'm in my top level board that I use for my team, I have my epics here, and that's great. I can see them. I have my boards I can switch to at this group level. But then when I click through into an issue, it kicks me back down into the project level. So I leave my group context. We can fix that by making it so that you look at issues on a board. Like that's not the thing, but right now it takes me here. And then if I go back to my issue board, right, via the navigation, it get dumped into like this thing that it wasn't where I was at and wasn't what I was expecting. And then I can't find my epics. So like, because issues are constrained to projects and epics are constrained to groups, you have to constantly switch between the two constructs to make that work. That's just one of the things. Another example is we have wikis at the project level, but folks want wikis at the group level. And the reason is that the same reason why folks want issues at the group level now is especially if you have a bunch of services or microservices that are the repos in the projects, it's annoying to create a dummy project just to house the issues and then manage that at the group level and then have to context switch between the project and the group just to accomplish basic project management things. And I think we're kind of at a point where the hierarchy, I've gotten good feedback on the hierarchy that folks like that, but we haven't executed on it super well in terms of having data flow down and up it. And we also keep getting these requests being like, hey, this thing already exists at the projects and we want to do it at the group level. And so we're going to spend a bunch of time duplicating what exists at the project level and making it work at the group level to a certain extent, instead of like having one thing that just works. I think a good way to, like, if you want to scroll down, look at this on your own, there's a bunch of feedback from customers specifically that like kind of say, like, this is from the sus survey, the way subgroups work is not intuitive. This one gentleman spent 2 weeks reading documentation and figuring out, and finally stumbled across a blog post I wrote about how we organize it for multiple product teams. And he just says it's broken because like the issues don't live at the group level, which is where the team lives, if that makes sense. And kind of going down today, like this is how we sell GitLab to organizations that practice safe. For example, we'll have the portfolio, which is a group. Then you have a project in that group that you manage your issues in. But again, your epics are going to live here. Then you have another subgroup, like, and you basically have to create this project underneath it just to have your issues. You could also insert wiki or insert whatever thing that you need to be able to do that doesn't exist at the group level. And what I really want to get to, and what makes more logical sense to me, is this sort of thing where you have a portfolio, you have a value stream program, whatever it's called. In this, these are basically containers or workspaces or anything, and you can make it extensible enough to turn it on and off features for what use cases you want to use it for, and make it accessible and approachable early on to configure it and set it up. And then the next step, once we get like things flowing up and down the stream here well and it working, is then to look at some of the access stuff and like, can you assign an issue or an epic or an MR, for example, from one workspace across to another, and it show up in both places. So that way you can separate out your repositories and how you want to structure your code and organize that from your team, and how you want to structure your project management. So that's sort of the high level, and it seemed like figuring out how to do this would be a better use of our time and resources than just creating the same thing that exists at the project at the group level. And we have the opportunity to make it a much more intuitive user experience, while also, I think, like shaving off a ton of time on things that aren't gonna like produce as much value as we had hoped. So.
Also, that's great, Gabe. And I guess just in regards to like some of the concerns we had on the access side, and I guess ultimately what we want to achieve here from access is to maybe like piggyback off some of this work so that we have a more simplified hierarchy that we can attach all of our kind of like permissions and authentication models against. At the moment, we face quite a lot of challenges in regards to as some examples, some features we've shipped recently is being able to share groups with groups, and that's created quite a lot of headaches with the group hierarchy, with how groups work, with the fact that you can have members of groups or you can have members of groups and of projects. So it basically just creates like this multifaceted problem where there's no like single sort of it's like single source of truth, as it were. We've also been looking at a lot of stuff recently around people are probably somewhat familiar with the concept of group managed accounts, which is the goal is to ultimately give organizations a bit more control of their users, specifically on .com. Because at the moment, users basically exist in like a top level hierarchy and don't actually belong necessarily within inside the group itself. So I think we see this piece of work, like whatever solution we come up here with, as a way to simplify the product. You know, we've talked about the concept of namespaces or organizations. And I think whatever we come up with there will be a nice way to kind of be like a root of everything that we connect our like authentication models and permission models against. So ultimately for us, it's about seeing how we can simplify things to make our lives easier as well. And no doubt that will go way beyond access into the other groups as well.
Yeah, and just to that a little, the working group is sort of talking about projects and groups, sort of owning various bits and pieces. But I think this also applies to users. For example, a user owning a wiki, and possibly in the future an organization owning a wiki. There's a lot of these things that sort of apply sort of beyond projects and groups owning various bits and pieces between themselves.
I would agree with that too. I think one of the most requested features internally at GitLab is instance level epics, so that we have the .com group and the .org group, and they want to share work across the two, and they can't right now. In like a shared board or a shared epic. And I think it's the same kind of, like if there was a top level organization, or if there was some sort of thing where you could have those two belong there. And I also agree with the personal users as well. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think the use case to be able to just start a new wiki where it's its own container is really big for people coming from Confluence or places where they're used to just creating a wiki and not having it with everything else, with issues, with the repo, with all of that. So talking about this gets me excited because I feel like there could be just so much flexibility in terms of how you could configure your content in GitLab too.
So we have 6 or so minutes left. Back to what Gabe had suggested earlier, does it make sense to walk through that and maybe see if we can divide and conquer it, so we can come back next week with a little bit more detail and context on each of those things?
What would high level, and this is where Alex, I thank you for writing so much about namespaces. That was super insightful. What is our working assumption of what a solution would look like? I guess is a good question to ask. From a technical standpoint, like how could we merge the things together? You know, I think that's going to inform quite a bit of what we do from a UX side. And instead of saying like, let's just say this is what it has to look and how it has to behave from an interaction standpoint, it'd be helpful to understand trade-offs that we need to take into consideration when thinking about the user experience.
Yeah, I think I reserve the right to change this later, but for now, yeah, I think there's a lot that we can do with namespaces. I think there's it's a bit of a hidden gem in the system, and it's been forgotten about, I think. I kind of see a project. I don't really know what a project is today. It's like a loose collection of resources. I think previously it might have meant a repository and some issues. Then maybe we group them with groups, but it's grown it seems at least it's grown well beyond that, where it's essentially a collection of resources. And to me, a collection of resources is really just like a group. So I see a lot of those as being very similar. And in the code, there's a lot of similarities and a lot of kind of duplication of code. So I think that the trick is to try to bring all of it back into using namespaces. Try to, if a user owns a namespace, a group is a namespace. To me, a project is a namespace with some features turned on and off. I think if we can bring it back into some sort of namespace kind of uniform definition, then we have a chance of generalizing. Otherwise, maybe there's some sort of alternative where we just have some kind of polymorphic ownership of issues and of wikis and snippets and so on. But I think that the namespace architecture in the system already exists, and I think will support what we're after. But it's it'd help to get into it a bit, to try bits out here and there and see what happens.
So if we took that approach, we could, right now, the things that the objects that belong to projects or resources, if we just generalize it and said basically these are things that all can belong to a namespace, right? Any namespace, and then kind of take the good things about our hierarchy, which is like, objects can roll up to parent namespaces, basically, even though they're still explicitly owned by the namespace that created it. They're still visible and like kind of upstream. I think I don't know if that would work for everything, and like I don't know if you would want a wiki, for example, to roll up, or so we might have to think about which things are which things do bubble up and which things bubble down. So I think you have the bidirectional thing for certain objects as well. I mean, what would we want to do as a next step? Technically, would we want to look at a POC, and then while that is happening, like we could work on some UX validation, be like, hey, users, would you understand this if this is how it behaved, or what? We kind of leave it up to the folks that are great at implementing things to direct us.
I have a question too around namespaces, and just because the URL obviously would be changing, right, as you go deeper. Is one of our constraints for this that a container only reports into one thing? So I couldn't have a wiki or issues that are going up to multiple parents. Like we don't, that would simplify things a lot, but.
It would simplify things. I think and I talked to Melissa, the PM for Access, and it basically like, we need things to be able to go up and to go down where it makes sense, but we also need things to be assignable across. So the canonical ownership of an issue, for example, like if you have two sibling containers, right? Container A and container B. Container A creates an issue and maybe it assigns it to container B, right? So it's going to show up in container A still in the list. It will show up in container B as something that needs to be executed. So that way container B, like let's assume that that's a team. They don't have to switch contexts to this other container to work on something specific to that. They can see all their work in the place where they live. That would only work, I think, if you had the concept of what we do now, which is sharing groups with other groups. Like if you had access, it would be nice if you could assign things, and the ownership would be with where it was created, but it could also show up with maybe one other like sibling container is a work item. That more or less would solve all of the use cases that I've come across with customers being frustrated, because then they can use one hierarchy to organize their people and their teams, and then they can use another hierarchy to organize their code or the products or whatever. And that way you don't have, if you ever switch things like your products or whatever, you don't have to then redo and remove all of your team members and the team structure.
We have 10 seconds. So I guess between now and next week, can we make sure everyone reads the thread that Alex started on that epic, if you haven't yet, around namespaces? It is super insightful and can help center us around this. But maybe I like Gabe's suggestion of we spend some time thinking about those parts, like engineering folks think through namespaces and kind of call out in that epic any concerns or any questions, and then we can discuss next week, and then we can follow up with UX to think how we might do some solution validation around that. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day. See you next week.
Bye.